Yo, what's up guys, Alpha, and today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth deck breakdown of another deck that I've recently used to get top of the arena ladder with. Now as you can see, I'm only technically rank 2 at the moment, but like I said in the last video, the person who's rank 1 at the moment is doing an experiment with exploits, so we're technically top of the ladder out of people who are playing legit, if that makes sense. So, as usual, there's going to be a Scryfall link down in the description, and it has the full deck list in there that you can easily import into Arena if you want to try the deck out for yourself. And as usual, I'm not going to be reading out the text on every single card, otherwise the video would go on for ages. So if you don't know what any of the cards do, just pause the video, click on the Scryfall link, and have a quick read of any of the cards that you're unfamiliar with. So with that out of the way, this is my black-white Abiding Grace Sacrifice deck in Historic. Before I get into the explanation, the first thing I want to say about this deck is it's actually surprisingly cheap to build on Arena. Well, the main deck is anyway, because outside of the mana base, the only rares and mythics are 3 copies of Yawgmoth. So because of that, what I've done is I've made a budget version of the deck that doesn't use any rares or mythics whatsoever. So there's going to be another Scryfall link down in the description for this version, and since this doesn't cost any rares or mythics, I thought if I put this version out there, it's very easy for anyone to build. Try the deck out, see if they like it, and then if you do like it, you can, upgrade the mana base and upgrade to the Yawgmoths and then start building the sideboard. So I thought that this would just be a nice way for anyone to try the deck out before they invest their rares or mythics into it, if that makes sense. But like I said, this is the full version of the deck, and as the name suggests, this is a sacrifice deck built around Abiding Grace. So Abiding Grace, if you don't know what it is, it's a 3 mana enchantment, and at the beginning of our end step, we either gain a life or we return a 1-drop creature from the graveyard to the battlefield. Now, we're basically never interested in gaining the 1 life. We really want to be abusing the returning 1-drops from the graveyard to the battlefield. So as you can see, we've got a bunch of 1-drop creatures in the deck, and we've got a bunch of sacrifice outlets for those 1-drop creatures as well. So Abiding Grace allows us to play the 1-drops, sacrifice them to our sack outlets to get the value off the sack outlet. A lot of the creatures give us value when they enter the battlefield or die, so we get the value off the creature as well, and then we can repeatedly bring that creature back with Abiding Grace. Bring it back, sacrifice it to an outlet, get it back again. So it just creates these insane value loops that are really difficult for a lot of decks to beat. So we'll have a look at the 1-drop creatures to start off with. First of all, we've got 4 copies of Cauldron Familiar, so this drains for 1 when it enters the battlefield, and it's mainly here to loop with Witch's Oven. So if you've played any Historic for any number of the past few months, you'll probably come across this. Cat Oven loops are really difficult for any deck to beat, and even outside of the Cat Oven loop, Cauldron Familiar is a great card to sacrifice to any of our other sack outlets, because we can just play it, sack it, and then it just stays in the graveyard, so when we do hit the Witch's Oven, we can then set up our Cat Oven loop. So Cauldron Familiar, really important card in the deck. Cat Oven loop is great against aggro because it produces a chump blocker every turn, and we can start draining them out whilst gaining life as well. And against the mid-range and control decks, it just allows a consistent source of damage over the course of the game that's really difficult for them to interact with. Next up, we've got 4 copies of Cursebound Witch. So this is a 1 mana 1/2, and when it dies, we draft a card from its spellbook. So what that means is Cursebound Witch, the spellbook has 15 different cards in, and when it dies, we get given 3 of them at random, and we get to pick 1 of them to put into our hand. So I'm going to quickly go through all 15 of them and sort of explain what situations you want to pull certain ones in and which ones are better than others. So first of all, Witch's Cauldron. This is actually one of the better ones. So this is good, especially against grindier decks where the game is going to go long, at just providing us with a consistent sack outlet that provides card advantage. So it combos especially well with Abiding Grace. If we have Witch's Cauldron, we can sack a creature to gain a life and draw a card, and then immediately bring back that creature with Abiding Grace at the end of the turn. So Witch's Cauldron, one of the better ones, especially against grindier decks. Then we've got Witch's Vengeance. So this is the only removal spell that you can get from the spellbook, and obviously this is insane against the tribal decks like humans, merfolk, goblins. This is an absolute all-star in those matchups. But even outside of that, if the opponent just has a creature with 3 toughness or less that we need to be able to deal with, even though it's kind of slow to use a 3 mana sorcery to deal with them, it's fine in those situations to use it. And like I said, it's the only removal you can pull off the Cursebound Witch. So in those situations, Witch's Vengeance is decent as just spot removal as well. Then we've got Witch's Oven. Obviously, we're already running 4 in the main deck, and this is one of the best cards to pick. You know, typically the more ovens that we've got, the better, because our cat oven loops start draining for more every single turn. So Witch's Oven, one of the best cards to pull off it. Then Witch's Cottage. This is pretty much just a tap land. We're only running 1 swamp in the deck, so this is always going to enter play tapped. But if we're in a situation where we're missing land drops, getting a tap land is better than nothing. So if we need lands, this is fine. If we don't, I would avoid going for it most cases. Then Witch's Familiar. This is one of the worst cards in the spellbook. You should basically never get this one. Just a 3-mana 2/3 is just terrible in Historic. Then we've got Curse of Leeches. This is actually decent again against the grindier decks, especially against Control. If we can resolve this and drain them for 1 every turn, it's really powerful. And then if it goes tonight, it turns into a 4/4 with lifelink, which is decent. So against the slower decks, this is actually a pretty good pickup. Then we've got Cauldron Familiar. Again, we're already running 4 of this in the main, so this is another decent card if we have a sack outlet and we need a cheap creature, or if we have a Witch's Oven and we don't have a Familiar, this is a good pickup as well. Black Cat. This is an okay card. You know, it definitely gains a bit of value against combo and Control because there's a chance that we can snipe a good card from their hand. But, you know, typically other cards are better, but if we need a creature for one of our stack outlets and the other 2 options are good, if the other 2 options are bad, then this is a fine card to pick. Sorcerer's Broom. This is kind of too slow in most cases. There have been some matches against grindy decks where I have a lot of mana and I've got Cat Oven going where this is actually okay. You know, if we've got Cat Oven looping, we can just pay 3 to keep making copies of this. But in most situations, this is just going to be way too slow. Then we've got Bloodhunter Bat. Again, this is kind of a mediocre card. You know, if we need a flyer to either attack in the air or block against a deck like Phoenix, then it's fine. Similar to Black Cat, you know, we should only really be picking this if the other 2 cards that we've got aren't that great. Then we've got Unwilling Ingredient. This is actually another decent one, you know, just a cheap creature to be able to sacrifice. If we have a sack outlet and no creature, this is great to get. And then we can exile it from the graveyard to draw a card later in the game. So if we have a sack outlet and we need a creature, this is brilliant. Expanded Anatomy is pretty terrible. I basically avoid this one at all costs. Cruel Reality is actually a decent one, but only if we have the mana to cast it. You know, if the game's going long and we have access to 7 mana, this is a good one to pick, but obviously try and avoid this in the early game. And then Torment of Scarabs. I've actually been pretty underwhelmed with this card. The only matchup where it's felt good is against Control, so if you feel like you can resolve this against Control, being able to deal them 3 damage every single turn is actually pretty decent, but against most other matchups it's just way too slow. And then finally, Trespasser's Curse. This is one that really depends on the matchup. Against opposing Cat Oven decks, this is actually really good because it mitigates their drain from their Cat Oven. And against decks that go wide, like Goblins or even the Inquisitor Bant Blink decks, this can actually be decent. So Trespasser's Curse kind of depends on the matchup and how wide the opponent's going with their creatures. So that's all the cards in the Cursebound Witch spellbook. But this card is really strong, you know, especially in conjunction with Abiding Grace. If we can get Cursebound Witch down, sack it to one of our outlets, and then get a card from the spellbook and repeatedly do that with Abiding Grace, it's really powerful. Next up, we've got 4 copies of Shambling Ghast. So when this dies, we either give a creature -1/-1 until end of turn or create a treasure. So the -1/-1 ability is really good at picking off small creatures and just generally making combat difficult for your opponent. Very nice in conjunction with Yawgmoth at being able to pick off bigger creatures as well. And then the ability to create a treasure is really nice. First of all, because it allows us to ramp. You know, if we can sacrifice this on turn 1 or 2, we can play Yawgmoth on turn 3, which is really nice. It fixes our mana in situations where we need that. But we also have a decent number of cards that care about sacrificing artifacts as well as creatures. So Ravenous Squirrel, Deadly Dispute, and Rite of Oblivion can all sacrifice artifacts instead of creatures if we need. So having treasures lying about later in the game is really nice for these 3 cards as well. And then finally, 4 copies of Ravenous Squirrel. So unlike the other 1-drops in the deck, this is typically a card that we don't want to sacrifice if we can avoid it. Obviously, if the opponent's going to use a removal spell on it, or we need to use one of our sacrifice outlets, then it's fine to do. But for the most part, we'd much rather play the other 1-drops and sacrifice them, because this is a card that just gets insanely big really quickly. You know, if you've played against the Golgari food deck, you'll know how powerful this card is, because whenever we sack an artifact or creature, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and this gets out of control really fast. Then in terms of the activated ability, obviously we're only a white-black deck, but we are running for Slitherboard pathway in the mana base, so if we have enough white-black lands, we can play the pathway on green and then allow us to activate the Ravenous Squirrel ability later in the game. And additionally, even if we don't have access to green mana in our lands, we can sacrifice treasures that we get off Shambling Ghast or Deadly Dispute in order to activate the Ravenous Squirrel as well. So those are all the 1-drops. Next up we'll look at the sacrifice outlets themselves. So 4 copies of Witch's Oven, obviously mainly here to loop with Cauldron Familiar, but it does just give us a once per turn free sacrifice outlet. So if we don't have any other sack outlets and we've got Abiding Grace, we can just use this to sack our creatures to gain a food, and then get the creature back that we sacrifice with Abiding Grace. And then we'll have multiple foods stored up for either when we hit the Cauldron Familiar, or like I said, you know, Ravenous Squirrel, Deadly Dispute and Rite of Oblivion all allow us to sacrifice artifacts instead of creatures. So if we have surplus food lying around, that's really nice for these 3 cards as well when we don't want to sacrifice creatures. Then we've got 4 copies of Village Rites. So 1 mana instant, sack a creature to draw 2 cards. This is just great card advantage, keeps the cards flowing, you know, make sure we hit land drops in the early game, just really nice card advantage in general. We've got 4 copies of Deadly Dispute. So similar to Village Rites, but we can sacrifice an artifact or a creature to pay for the cost, which is really nice, like I said, with treasure or food tokens. We can also sacrifice Witch's Oven in a pinch, but we really want to avoid doing that if we can. And we draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. So this is really nice because, you know, same card advantage as Village Rites, but the treasure token, first of all, allows us to ramp into Yawgmoth. You know, if we play this on turn 2, we can play Yawgmoth on 3. But it also gives us all the benefits that Shambling Ghast does as well. You know, fixes our mana, provides an artifact to be able to sack to Squirrel, Deadly Dispute or Rite of Oblivion later in the game, and fixes our mana if we need it as well. Then 4 copies of Rite of Oblivion. I've been really impressed with this card. So sacrifice a non-land permanent to exile target non-land permanent, and then it has flashback for 4 as well. So we can basically sacrifice a creature or an artifact or Abiding Grace if we really need to, but we really want to avoid doing that if we can. But sacrifice a creature or an artifact to exile anything the opponent has. So this kills any creature. You know, Fatal Push is the other main removal spell that's run in the sacrifice decks, but I've really preferred this because we can kill stuff like Serra's Emissary, like Niv Mizzet, any creature. It kills planeswalkers like Teferi, it can kill any artifacts and enchantments, like against the Golgari food deck we can kill both their Witch's Oven and their Trail of Crumbs with this. And the most important thing is that this can kill Graveyard Hate as well, so we can use this to kill Grafdigger's Cage and Rest in Peace, because our deck is quite reliant on the graveyard, so having 4 copies of a main deck way to kill that we can also recur from the graveyard is really nice. And the other nice thing about the way that the cards resolve is if the opponent has something like a Rest in Peace in play, we can play this, sacrifice a non-land permanent, exile the Rest in Peace, and then Rite of Oblivion goes to the graveyard and doesn't get exiled, so we can cast it with the flashback later in the game as well. So Rite of Oblivion, just sick at enabling our sacrifice synergies and being able to deal with literally any permanent the opponent has, and then getting value off the flashback later in the game is just sick as well. And then finally we've got 3 copies of Yawgmoth. So this is such a powerful card, and I've been really trying to find a good home for this card, because outside of the Hapatra green-black combo deck, I've really struggled to find a deck that really abuses Yawgmoth really well. You know, for the most part, a deck that you want to include Yawgmoth in is a deck that has a bunch of cheap creatures that you can recur, and this is the perfect shell for that. You know, we have so many 1-drops and we can recur them all with Abiding Grace. So this is just sick at sacrificing our cheap 1-drops, picking apart the opponent's board if they're playing a creature deck, or even outside of that, just repeatedly producing card advantage. So this is an absolute all-star against opposing creature decks, especially the aggro decks. I typically do sideboard this out against control, but even against control game 1, this is just a consistent way to sack our creatures and draw cards as well. So Yawgmoth has been really sick in the deck. Only running 3 copies, first of all because it's legendary, so there is, you know, you don't really want to draw multiples of it. There is diminishing returns on drawing the 2nd and 3rd copy. It's a 4-drop in an otherwise pretty low curve deck, so I feel like if I start running more 4-drops, I might have to look at running more lands. And additionally, I'm not really sure what I would cut to make room for the 4th Yawgmoth anyway, so I've been liking 3 copies. It's been working nicely. In terms of the mana base itself, I think we've got 21 lands here. Yeah, 21 lands, which, you know, we are a pretty low curve deck, and we do have multiple ways to draw in the early game, as well as being able to create treasure tokens off the Shambling Ghast. So 21 has been working out really nicely. In terms of the actual lands themselves, we've got all of the black-white dual lands that we can cast untapped early in the game. I don't think you can really afford to be running check lands in this deck because we do want to be having untapped lands on the first few turns for sure. Then we've got basic plains and basic swamp, which I think is really necessary at the moment because cards like Field of Ruin is still pretty popular in the format. 2 Hive of the Eye Tyrant, just as a way to use our mana base if we do flood out, you know, especially against a deck like Control where they might have a lot of removal, they might have counter spells for Abiding Grace. Hive of the Eye Tyrant just gives us something to do with our mana if we do end up flooding out, and also provides us with some additional graveyard hate, which is nice. 1 copy of Phyrexian Tower. This card is insane in this sacrifice deck, you know, being able to ramp and sacrifice our creatures, you know, it's another way to cast Yawgmoth on turn 3, which is really nice. But again, this is another card that has pretty severe diminishing returns. Drawing the second copy of this, especially in a deck with only 21 lands, is pretty bad. So the first copy of Phyrexian Tower is really good. I think the second copy isn't really worth running in a deck with as low a land count as we're running here. And then finally, like I said, we got the Force Sideboard pathway because it does provide black. You know, if I wasn't running the pathway, I would just be running additional swamps in this slot. So it makes sense to give myself the option here, you know. If we already have enough white and black mana, we can just cast this on green and then we can activate Scroll without having to sacrifice treasures later in the game. So that's the main deck. I've been really happy. I've been actually surprisingly happy with how this deck's been working. It's felt really powerful, and Abiding Grace, really strong. Rite of Oblivion giving us an answer to Graveyard Hate, which is probably the best sideboard stuff against us. I've just been really happy with how this deck's been working. Then onto the sideboard, starting off with 4 copies of Esper Sentinel. So this is great against, first of all, Combo and Control, which are typically the worst matchups for the sacrifice decks like this. Just either draws us cards or buys us tempo against them. And if they do remove it, we can just bring it back easily with Abiding Grace as well. So really strong at helping shore up the slightly weaker matchups. Also good against other decks like Phoenix, or generally other decks that are running a bunch of non-creature spells. And again, you know, most of those decks really want to be able to deal with this in the early game. If we can land an Abiding Grace and repeatedly bring back the Esper Sentinel, that's going to be a nightmare for them. Then 3 copies of Valentin, Dean of the Vein. So this is a 1-mana card that basically works as Graveyard Hate. Now, this doesn't work as efficiently as something like a Soul Guide Lantern, so this isn't a card I would bring in against Arclight Phoenix, for example, because it only it only exiles creatures that are dying from the battlefield, and it doesn't, you know, it doesn't exile the instants and sorceries from the graveyard like something like a Soul Guide Lantern does. But against a deck like Phoenix, I'm typically bringing in Esper Sentinel alongside Fatal Push and Meathook Massacre, so I'm not really interested in Graveyard Hate in that specific matchup anyway. Where this really shines is against decks like the Rakdos Arcanist deck, where if they play a Croxer from hand, this will just exile it immediately. But more specifically, this feels like the Mirror Breaker against the Golgari food decks as well, because this just completely shuts off the opponent's Cat Oven loops, which is the main way that they grind out advantage in the mirror match. And on top of that, you know, similar to Esper Sentinel, this is great because even if the opponent kills it, we can just immediately recur it with Abiding Grace as well. So I've been really, really impressed with Valentin, specifically in the Golgari Food Mirror and the Rakdos Arcanist matchup as well. Then removal-wise, we've got 3 copies of Fatal Push and 2 copies of Meathook Massacre. I've been really liking this split against the creature decks. You know, obviously there are certain decks like Auras where we need the single target removal, and then other decks like, you know, Phoenix, the Inquisitor Captain decks, or any tribal deck. Meathook Massacre is an absolute all-star there as well. So I've been really liking this split of 3 and 2. And then finally we've got 3 copies of Thoughtseize. Just another card that really helps against the combo and control decks, which are typically weaker matchups. So that's the deck. I've been really happy with it. I've been really enjoying playing this deck as well. And like I said, it's surprisingly cheap to build. So if you want to try it out, check out the budget version of it, and then make the upgrades as you get more wildcards on your account. So now onto the gameplay. I've just got a couple matches that I played with this deck on the arena ladder, so you guys can see it in action. Give me a shout if you've got any questions at all down below, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, sweet, here we go. Okay, so going second. And yeah, sweet, this hand looks good. You know, we've got Cat Oven, we've got Abiding Grace, Deadly Dispute as well, and Rite of Oblivion for removal. Yeah, this hand looks sick. Okay, Spy Bluff Canal, so that could be a number of things. Maybe Phoenix, probably my first guess. Huh, okay, Inspiring Vantage. Not sure what that is, so we'll definitely play Cauldron Familiar here. And then we'll keep mana open for Village Rites. You know, if they tap out for something here, then we can sack the Cat to Witch's Oven, bring it back, Village Rites, and then Abiding Grace next turn. Okay, Gideon. So they're probably on the Chance for Glory Lotus Field deck, I'd imagine. And since they've tapped out, you know, getting to resolve Abiding Grace is really good here. You know, if you can resolve Abiding Grace against a control deck, it's so good. So yeah, we're going to do that play. Bring back the cat here. Village Rites, and then we'll just Abiding Grace next turn and get the cat back again. Okay, sweet. Those are good draws there. So we'll play this on black. And then we'll just slam Abiding Grace and get back the Familiar to keep the cat and loops going here. And then next time we got, you know, potentially Oven, double Squirrel if we need. If we draw another land, you know, we could Rite of Oblivion the Gideon here, so a lot of good options here. Okay, so they plus on the Familiar, we'll just suck it to the Oven. And we won't bring the cat back here. First of all, because they could be running Flame Burst Bolt, which could exile it. But second of all, we want to play a Squirrel here. And it would miss out on the counter if we did that. So I think we'll play Squirrel here. I definitely want to Rite of Oblivion this Gideon. And I'm going to play the second Oven. I'm going to play the Rite of Oblivion first, because I think killing this Gideon is more important than getting the second Oven in play. You know, they could be playing Censor or Jwari Disruption, so I'd rather kill the Gideon here than get the second Oven in play in case they do have Censor or Jwari Disruption. So I think we'll just Rite of Oblivion, sacrifice the Familiar to kill the Gideon here. Now, I mean, we probably should loop the Oven first here, but I don't think it should make a difference at all. So we'll just Rite of Oblivion first. Oh, actually, wait, thinking about it, they're running Stifle. So what I'm planning to do here is Rite of Oblivion, exile the Gideon, we'll see if this resolves, then play the second Oven, and then bring the cat back with Abiding Grace, but they could Stifle the Abiding Grace trigger, which would mean that we miss out on the cat Oven loop, which would have made Squirrel a 5/5. Yeah, okay, that was a misplay on my part for sure. So if we'd looped cat Oven before we played the Rite of Oblivion there, Squirrel would be a 5/5 and we'd have got value off this. We'd have drained them out for an extra 1 here. And now, yeah, so we're getting punished. So Squirrel would have been a 5/5. It would have been able to dodge the static discharge there. So, I mean, we're still in a good spot, but we would have been in a, you know, a much better spot if I played around Stifle there. And I don't think there was any good reason to not do the cat Oven loop there. I just completely forgot about Stifle. So that's a bit annoying. I think, you know, they don't have priority here, I can tell. So I'm happy to just bring back the Familiar and get in for extra damage. Okay, Yawgmoth is a nice draw here, but I think we're much more interested in getting Squirrel down. We're getting the other Squirrel back from the graveyard with Abiding Grace, and then we can just hold up Deadly Dispute. And with 2 Witch's Ovens in play, these Squirrels are going to get really big really fast, so I'm pretty happy with this position. Okay, Anger of the Gods. Well, we can make these Squirrels way too big for that to matter. Make them 2/2s. Okay, sweet. So against control, pretty simple sideboarding. I bring in 4 Sentinel, 3 Thoughtseize, and just cut 3 Yawgmoth and 3 Shambling Ghast. You know, the Treasure of Shambling Ghast is useful, but against a matchup where the only creature that they're running in the early game is Strict Proctor, I think Shambling Ghast does lose a bit of value there. And Yawgmoth, while it is decent, you know, it's reasonable against control as just a card advantage engine, you are missing out on the value of killing creatures, and I think against control, you just want to get underneath them. You just want to get Sentinel down early. You want to get Cat Oven down early. And if you can resolve an Abiding Grace against them, it's so difficult for them to win because, you know, Abiding Grace is an enchantment, and there really isn't much specific enchantment removal in the format at the moment. So if you can resolve an Abiding Grace and they don't have Graveyard Hate, you're kind of an odds-on favourite from that point. Just trying to think if things changed because we're not, you know, I imagine the opponent's playing a more combo version. You know, most of the Lotus Field decks running Gideon also run Chance for Glory, but, you know, Sentinel and Thoughtseize are still all-stars against that version as well. So I think, you know, overall, I think we should be pretty good in this matchup. But we'll see. Yeah, I'm just a bit annoyed about that misplay last game. Always happens the second after I make a misplay, I always remember. I should maybe just play a little bit slower. Okay, so this hand is, it's a bit annoying we don't have white for the Sentinel, but I think we can keep her, you know, on the draw, and we've got Cursebound Witch, we can sack to Village Rites, so we have got, you know, if we can get this Village Rites off, we've got a lot of looks at a white source. Okay, second Sentinel, we really need to draw this white source off the Cursebound Witch here, really. Okay, search for Azcanta. So we'll attack with the Witch and Village Rites, and since we draw Rite of Oblivion, we really need to draw at least another creature that we can sack to Village Rites or a white source here. Okay, I mean, Witch's Cauldron is normally going to be my pick here, but since we're light on lands, I think I'm going to take Witch's Cottage just as a backup, and sick. We hit the white source so we can get Sentinel out here. Yeah, obviously now we've drawn a land, I kind of regret taking Witch's Cottage, but, you know, I think you've got a plan for the worst case scenario there. We're only running 21 lands, so we're not guaranteed to hit a land, so I think grabbing the Witch's Cottage as a backup was fine there. Proctor into Lotus Fields, that's a pretty strong turn from them. They're going to have a lot more mana. I think, you know, playing the second Sentinel here does make us very vulnerable to Anger of the Gods, but I think it's really important to do. Could play Witch's Oven, but I think since Anger of the Gods is the worst thing here, we can play Cursebound Witch and hold up Village Rites as sort of a way to hedge against Anger of the Gods a little bit. And if they don't... Oh wow, they've been in Anger of the Gods. So they must have one in hand, surely. Because if they don't have Anger of the Gods, I think double Sentinel's pretty good for us. But, yeah. I'm surprised they didn't attack with the Proctor first, just to get an extra damage in, but I guess it doesn't really matter. So we'll Village Rites the Cursebound Witch here. You know, there's something to be said about keeping the Sentinels out of exile so that we can bring them back with Abiding Grace, but I think they have so much mana already that the value of Sentinels kind of going down now anyway. So Black Cat, you know, normally Unwilling Ingredient's the better pick there, but considering, you know, they're only down to 3 cards in hand now, I think Black Cat's better here because we have a much higher chance of sniping something good from their hand. Now we could go Phyrexian Tower, sack the Black Cat, and then play Cat Oven to get the card out of their hand and play around Anger of the Gods. But I think since they have Azcanta, and they could very well play Leer or Teferi and get towards flipping the Azcanta, I would much rather play the Black Cat, play Cat Oven here, sack the Black Cat to get a card out of their hand, and then, you know, this does play into another Anger of the Gods. They could very well exile our Cauldron Familiar since we can't sack it here, but doing this play gives us the option of playing Rite of Oblivion and then flashing it back next turn. So if they play Teferi or Leer and then Azcanta's about to flip, which, you know, if they play Teferi and play anything, Azcanta will flip. If they play Leer and anything, Azcanta is about to flip. So I want to be able to go Rite of Oblivion. Okay, they've got the Leer. So I want to be able to go Rite of Oblivion, kill the Leer, and then flash back the Rite of Oblivion as well, because if Leer survives, or if Azcanta flips here, we're in really big trouble. Okay, so 6, yeah, so I'm very glad we made that play last turn. Obviously we would have got blown out by Anger of the Gods, but this way it plays around what they've currently got, so we can Rite of Oblivion, sacrifice the food to exile the Leer. Then we can attack with the Cauldron Familiar, and unfortunately we do have to sacrifice both the cat and the oven, but if Azcanta flips here, we're going to lose. They're just going to bury us in card advantage, so killing the Azcanta is really important here. And we are kind of left on empty as well. This game's going to go down to top decks now, but even if we kept cat oven, I don't think that's going to beat a flipped Azcanta, so I'm pretty happy with that play, and now it's just going to come down to who top decks better here, I think. I mean, we do have Thoughtseize, which is nice, but I don't imagine they'd have anything they wouldn't want to play. Yeah, if they had like a Teferi or a Leer, they'd just play it out. So we'll play the Hive here because, you know, we want to start attacking with it if we can, and we can, you know, we can animate the Hive and sack it to Village Rites to gain card advantage if we need as well. So they play out the Lotus Field. They have a lot of mana available, so if they top deck a Teferi, they're probably just going to win here. So we could attack with the Hive, but drawing a Squirrel, I really want to have Village Rites mana up once we play this Squirrel here, just in case they're holding on to removal. Because being left without a creature and Village Rites is kind of a nightmare here, so even though we could have got in for 3, I didn't want to risk them killing the Squirrel and me not being able to sack it in response. Because then we're kind of forced to activate Hive and sack it to Village Rites next turn, which isn't really what we want to be doing. So we'll fire up the Hive here, get in for 4. We could sack the Hive to Village Rites here, but you know, we're still essentially playing against a control deck, and Hive is really good against control decks. And it's getting 3 damage in per turn, so I think I'm happy just passing here and holding on to Village Rites. We kind of want to 2-for-1 them if they try and removal the, you know, if they have a removal spell for Squirrel, we really want to have Village Rites available there. Yeah, like them, perfect. So we sack and draw 2. Okay, sweet, that's pretty good. Okay, another oven is really nice here because we can play the oven here, activate the Hive, and attack in. And then we can play the Squirrel and sack the Hive to start setting up Cat Oven loops. I think Squirrel plus Cat Oven is probably better here than Hive Cat Oven, because we could sack the Squirrel to the oven instead, but I think, you know, if they can't draw a removal for the Squirrel here, it's out of range of Static Discharge and Anger of the Gods, which seems to be the removal suite they're playing. And I think we just need to maximise damage here. You know, we need to reduce the clock as much as we can. Oh wow, another oven. Okay, that should be lethal then. I mean, we'll see. They could have something, but Arena seems to be giving away that they don't, you know. Yeah, sweet. I'm just going to go for it here because it doesn't look like they have priority. The only thing we could get punished here with is Aether Gust, which we've seen. But they don't seem to have priority, so I think I'm just going to go for lethal here. Okay, sweet. Oh, whoops, I didn't realise they were already at 7. So we could have got max punished by Aether Gust there, but we could see they didn't have priority, so nice, we got there. Okay, sweet, we get to go first here. And yeah, this looks good, you know, it's a bit annoying having double Yawgmoth, but we've got Oven, we've got Shambling Ghast into Village Rites, pretty good start. You know, if we sacrifice the Shambling Ghast and draw our 3rd land, we can play Yawgmoth on 3, which is really nice. Okay, against Drowned Catacombs, I think I'm going to fire off the Village Rites now, because with this hand we really do need to draw 2 off the Village Rites here. We don't want to risk running into a Censor or Jwari Disruption. And then with 2 Yawgmoths in hand, I think I'm happy just slamming one next turn, even though it could be countered by a Censor or Jwari. Now, Abiding Grace is interesting. You know, there's something to be said about playing Abiding Grace and dodging Censor or Jwari, but I think you know, with Shambling Ghast being the only one drop in the graveyard, that doesn't really apply enough pressure against a control deck. And even if they had Censor or Jwari there, we still have the second Yawgmoth in hand, so we can attack him for 2 here. We can play Abiding Grace first, just to play around Censor or Jwari. Play the Shambling Ghast, and then get back the second Shambling Ghast from the graveyard. And now we're pretty well set up. We can start sacking these to draw cards, and repeatedly get the Shambling Ghast back every turn, which is nice. Let's see what the opponent's got here. Okay, that's pretty annoying. So they don't name odd or even until the card's resolution, so we could just let them do it. But I think, you know, we want to make sure that we have Shambling Ghast in the graveyard so we can keep using Abiding Grace. And I'm happy just sacrificing them both here, because we get treasures from it. They're going to kill the Yawgmoth, but we have the second one in hand anyway. So next turn, now we've drawn Squirrel, we can go Squirrel into Yawgmoth and get back Shambling Ghast as well. And Oven is a great draw. So now we can go Squirrel, Yawgmoth, Oven, and then get back Shambling Ghast. And we're in a 6 spot at that point. And then we have, you know, we're really well set up against control. If we draw a Cauldron Familiar here, we've got 2 Ovens to loot with them. We've got Squirrel getting bigger every turn. We're repeatedly getting back Shambling Ghast, and we have Hive of the Eye Tyrant available as well, so I'm pretty confident about this spot. It's looking good. Let's see what the opponent's got here. Okay, wow, I was not expecting that. Probably going to name Ravenous Squirrel here, I'd imagine. Which is a little bit annoying. I mean, we can sacrifice it to Yawgmoth, but Squirrel was going to be our biggest damage, so... Well, assuming they name it. I don't really... Yeah, that must be what they name here, surely. Yeah, okay. So we can suck it. Drawing Squirrel's pretty bad. I guess we probably... I'm playing a bit quickly. We should have probably sacrificed the Squirrel pre-combat, because if we didn't draw anything good, we could have used the Hive of the Eye Tyrant to get him for 3 there. But if we draw something good here, then it doesn't matter. Okay, wow, that's great. So we can Rite of Oblivion, sacrificing this treasure to kill the Gideon's Intervention, then play this Squirrel in hand, and then get back the other Squirrel from graveyard. And then we're back into a great position again. So we'll get back the 1-drop here. Get back the Squirrel here, I mean. Okay. I mean, they can name Ravenous Squirrel again here, but we already have the Rite of Oblivion to kill the Gideon's Intervention, so... So we can sack the Shambling Ghast to Yawgmoth, then sack the treasure with Rite of Oblivion to kill the Intervention, and then Squirrel is alive to attack again. Okay, now we've drawn the Deadly Dispute, I think I want to... We'll sacrifice the Shambling Ghast to the Rite of Oblivion, and then we can sacrifice the treasure we get off the Shambling Ghast to Deadly Dispute. Oh wow, Test of Talents, okay. I was not expecting that either. Damn, okay, that's actually pretty annoying, because we don't have any other ways to kill Gideon's Intervention now if they exile all the other Rite of Oblivions from our deck. But I mean, we can still sack the Ravenous Squirrels here. It's a bit annoying that any, you know, Ravenous Squirrel is not going to be doing anything for the rest of this game. But it's fine, I think. So we'll sack the other one as well, since we're not going to get any value off it. Okay, and land is pretty good, because now we can play Shambling Ghast, and then at the end of their turn we can Deadly Dispute and sack this treasure. Or we could sacrifice the Shambling Ghast to play around Censor or Jwari Disruption, but we've not seen either of them all game, so I don't think it's really worth it at the moment anyway. So we're still in a good spot, you know, we can still keep looping these Shambling Ghasts with Yawgmoth here. Witching Well. Okay, this deck is full of stuff I wasn't expecting. And then, yeah, we'll Deadly Dispute, sack the treasure here. Oh wow, okay, Test the Talents again. Sure. Maindeck Test of Talents is interesting. I don't know what deck that's aimed at the moment. Okay, so our turn. I think we'll finally fire up this hive now. And we'll exile the extinction event just in case they have any way to recur it. Put them down to 6, get the second hive in play. And yeah, we can bring back a Shambling Ghast here. And then they're pretty dead on board next turn. They kind of need a sweeper here. Okay, Narset. So I guess they're digging for another extinction event or Wrath of God or something. Okay, so they hit the extinction event. Do they have the land? I mean, even if they do have the land, we still win here, right? We sacrifice the Shambling Ghast to make treasures and draw cards, and then we can attack with both Hive of the Eye Tyrants. Necromentia, okay. So they're just dead here then. I guess they're just trying to get a look at our deck. I mean, surely they've seen our deck through Test of Talents already though. Maybe they didn't get a proper look. But yeah, their deck is wild though, full of stuff that I wasn't expecting. But I mean, stuff like Necromentia, Unmoored Ego, those sorts of effects are really bad against our deck just because we have so many good threats, you know. Even if they took out everything other than Cursebound Witch, we could still win off the stuff that we pull off Cursebound Witch. Bonus is Citadel. I mean, yeah, I guess it makes sense they could assume we have Citadel in our deck, but unfortunately for them we don't. So yeah, they're probably just looking through our deck so they know how to sideboard. I mean, sideboarding against them should be pretty straightforward. You know, against control, it's just Sentinel in. Yeah, sweet. Sentinel in, Thoughtseize in, Yawgmoth out, Shambling Ghast out. Pretty simple stuff here. And you know, even though Yawgmoth was decent at generating card advantage that game, I think having Sentinel on turn 1 and Thoughtseize to get stuff from their hand is just better than that. Plus, if they're running counter spells, you know, they only had Test of Talents that game, but 4 mana Yawgmoth against control in the face of counter spells is pretty risky. Okay, this looks pretty good. You know, Abiding Grace is a card that's typically really good against control if it resolves. So, and we've got Familiar into Village Rites, so I'm pretty happy with this. Bit annoying that we've got so many lands already, but in a 21 land deck, chances of drawing more are pretty low. Okay, nice, that's a pretty good draw. So we can attack him with the Familiar here, play the Cursebound Witch, and then hold up Village Rites. And then, if we can get Abiding Grace down on turn 3, then repeatedly getting back Cursebound Witch would be sick. You know, that's so much card advantage. And I'm not going to activate Village Rites here, because if they do have a counter spell, oh wow, they kept they're running Necromentia and Unmoored Ego. That's interesting. So yeah, I didn't play Village Rites main phase like I did last game, because if they have a counter spell, I'd actually kind of rather they spend it on the Village Rites so that we can resolve Abiding Grace. But now, unless they Unmoored Ego for Abiding Grace, which they could do, you know, if they knew how the deck worked, that would actually be a pretty good card to pick. But if they don't pick Abiding Grace here, we can Village Rites the Cursebound Witch, slam Abiding Grace, and then just get it back again. And, you know, it's going to be really hard for them to beat that. You know, that's the great thing about Abiding Grace. It's an enchantment, so there's not that many cards that are commonly run in the format that deal with enchantments. Okay, they name Witches Oven, that makes sense. We've already got a Familiar, and it is very good against control, but like I said, those sort of deck extraction effects are really not very good against us, because we have so many different threats. Okay, I think Witch's Cauldron's the pick here, for sure. You know, Witch's Cauldron's actually pretty good in this spot, just making sure that we hit cards. Definitely gonna Abiding Grace here, get back a Cursebound Witch, and then we're very well set up next turn. You know, Witch's Cauldron is a consistent source of card advantage for us. We've got Deadly Dispute, Ravenous Scroll, and Cursebound Witch here, so Extinction Event's pretty annoying. You know, we do lose our cards there, but it shouldn't make that much of a difference here, hopefully. So we'll play out the Squirrel here. Play out the Cursebound Witch as well. And then we don't have any cards in graveyard, so we'll sack the Cursebound Witch to Deadly Dispute here, and then we can just get it back at the beginning of the end step. And yeah, I mean, Unwilling Ingredient's probably the best out of these. The other two are pretty bad in this spot. And Sentinel's an interesting draw. You know, Sentinel would normally be pretty good here, but I think I'm probably going to play the Witch's Cauldron just because I do want to play around Extinction Event a little bit more. You know, we're getting back another Cursebound Witch, and if we play Sentinel and they have another Extinction Event, that's kind of brutal. I'd rather hold on to 2 creatures here, just in case they have another Extinction Event. Okay, so they foretell something. Play a Witching Well. 2 to the bottom, okay. So I feel pretty good about this spot now. I think we'll just attack first here. Then we can sack the Witch's Cauldron, the Cursebound Witch to the Witch's Cauldron to draw a card, and then we get back the Cursebound Witch during the end step. Yeah, another Witch's Cauldron's actually a really nice pickup here. 2 sources of good card advantage. And then, yeah, I think we want to play Sentinel now. It's a card that definitely loses its value as the game goes on, so I'd rather get it down sooner than later. And then we'll play Tower. I think we'll hold on to a Familiar, just in case they have Extinction Event. You know, we want to have Phyrexian Tower available to sacrifice something. Probably sacrifice the Squirrel here. You know, that's a card I want to keep bringing back later in the game. Okay, so they're running Doomscar. I mean, I guess sacking with the Phyrexian Tower, I mean, it doesn't really make a difference, because they're going to die anyway, but... Okay, so this is pretty bad, honestly. These are like some of the worst 3. I think we have to take the Bloodhunter bat here, just because it deals more damage. The 3-2 thing is just terrible, and you know, we have more than enough lands, so we don't need the land here. So, So we could play Cauldron Familiar and start sacking it to the Witch's Cauldron, or we could play the Bloodhunter bat here. I'm not really sure what the best play is. Probably playing the Bloodhunter bat, I'd imagine. Or, it's interesting here, I'm not sure. I think we'll play Bloodhunter bat first. And then, you know, we're playing more around Extinction Event at this point because we have, you know, Bloodhunter bat is even, whereas the rest of the cards that we're going to have are all odd. So we'll play out the Cauldron Familiar. I think we just need to get as much power into play as possible to try and close the game out. And, you know, worst case scenario now is that they have Extinction Event, and even then we get to keep the Bloodhunter bat. We can sacrifice it to... Yeah, they do have the Extinction Event, but we get to keep the Bloodhunter bat, and if we run out of gas, we can still sack it to the Witch's Cauldron here. So we'll get him for 2. Play the Cursebound Witch, and then probably just pass the turn, get back. We could get back at Esper Sentinel, but I feel like they have enough lands, they can play around it pretty easily, so we'll just get back a Cursebound Witch here. And if they have another sweeper at all, we can just sack the Cursebound Witch to the Cauldron, draw a card, get a card off the spellbook, and we're just running away with card advantage. So if we want to activate the Cauldron, we should probably do it now so that we can activate Unwilling Ingredient. But I think at the moment, you know, we're better off keeping power into play, you know, keeping as much power in play as possible, and then if they have removal for our stuff, we can then sack it in response. But until they start removing our stuff, I think we just need to keep as much power in play in order to present the fastest clock possible now. Okay, Thoughtseize is pretty nice. We can see what they got going on now. And again, same thing with Village Rites. We won't activate this until they use removal. Okay, another Test of Talents, sure. I'm surprised they kept that in against us, to be honest. I mean, I guess it, you know, that countering the Rite of Oblivion with it last game was really good, so they might have thought that it was good against us just from that, but I think in general it's a pretty poor card against us. So I think it's pretty greedy to attack directly here. With Village Rites and Double Cauldron, I think it's important to make sure we kill Nasa, and also make sure they don't get another activation off it. We could sacrifice the Cursebound Witch to get value here, but like I said, I think it's probably better to just get as much power into play as possible, and then sack stuff in response to their removal, because if they don't have removal, we're just killing them a turn quicker here. Now we've got lethal on board, so they need to have something here. Yeah, and even if they do have removal, we can just sack in response to draw cards. So in a pretty good spot here. Okay, another Witching Well. And yeah, I mean, those deck extraction cards like Unmoored Ego and Necromancer, I think there needs to be very specific decks in the format for them to be good. You know, back when Nexus of Fate was in the format, or stuff like Emergent Ultimatum maybe, but right now I don't really think there are that many decks with those cards in Historic. So let's see if they got removal here. If they don't, we just win. Even if they do, we can get card advantage. Yeah, sweet.